What happens when water is exposed to EMF, or wireless radiation? Here's something you may not know. Water is conscious, and it responds vibrationally to whatever it is exposed to. At OMNIA, we've done an experiment where we froze and photographed 3 samples of water. Water which was not exposed to EMF radiation, the baseline, looked like this. Water which was exposed to an EMF field, a 5G radiation field in fact, looked like this. And water which was exposed to EMF that is balanced by the OMNIA radiation balancer looked like this. See the difference? Remember, your body is 70% water. And here's a special offer for the Journey to Truth crowd. Just enter the word truth in caps at the checkout for your 10% discount.
Started to help me understand them better. And I went for quite a while and I didn't really understand how are they superior because they're so similar to us, right? And all these experiences, like I took Sam Jess to the mall and things like that, you know, and the family down to the 4th of July fireworks and stuff. And it just, I found it so interesting. And then one of my family, I call them, she started to help me with the mind and teach me about the mind and took me through physical exercises and how life begins, right? In 3 days and how that comes together. And then not only did she tell me how that works, because I have to homerize everything. That's what I call it, because I don't, you know, I'm not super intelligent like they are. And so they have to really dumb it down. I call it homerization, like Homer Simpson. And they, you know, take me through these steps, right? And they started this thing with me changing into the mind. And when we got to a certain point now recently, I'm starting to understand how they are so superior because they come from the mind, right? And the mind is reaction and the brain is process, right? And so you have to think, you know, with the brain. And when you think, you can only connect to what you can relate to. Where in the mind, it's just a reaction, and then you let the brain process it. So, you know, that's been a big change for me. And I see, we did like a body swap, me and Sam Jess, and where I was her. And that was a whole nother experience and trying to understand what I was in, right? What I was doing. Then we had like where we brought our minds together and that sort of thing. And then that advanced even further. But the whole story of this whole thing is just love. Love is the magic. Love is what allows us to do all the things that we have capability of doing, which is an enormous amount of things that we can do. We have to come from love.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. You might notice I have a new studio right now. I'm temporarily staying in Florida for a while I hope to relocate down here, but we'll see what happens. If the universe presents any opportunities, then we'll see where it takes me. But tonight we are actually very excited to have on a guest that Niar Isley, a good friend of ours, has made us aware of. Zaysan. He is the author of 7 books now, I believe.
8.
Of 8. The what 8 books. By the way, how do you say this? Plejaren or Plejaren?
Plejaren.
Plejaren, okay. The Plejaren Diaries, which is a story of accidental extraterrestrial contact, but what it's more of a story of is unconditional love and the bigger picture of who we are, and it's actually really beautiful. I read the first book and I couldn't get you on the show fast enough. It was really profound and it resonated on such a deep level. It's not the typical contact story. It comes from the heart. And I felt that. And that's why, like, you know, I get excited every week to do these interviews, but I'm super excited this week to have you on the show. So welcome.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah,
for our audience who doesn't know who you are, can you give us a brief background of who you are and how this even started for you, and then even the context story, because not everyone knows your story. I wasn't aware of you until very recently, and I'm sure many others aren't either. So if we can just get a brief run through of that, and then we'll just hit the ground running with the rest.
Yeah, that's usually a really big question when you ask who I am, because I'm still keeping up with who I am, right? But I started out when I was really young in martial arts and stuff, and I have become a walking abbot with Shaolin, and so that's one thing. And then I became part of the Table of Ancients. I had a TV show at one time. I was one of the directors, and it went worldwide. It was about UFOs. It's called UFO AZ. Ted Lohman was the host. I've got 4 degrees. I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. When I was younger, I became a shrimper, and our boat broke down one time. And long story short, at the bus station where I was sleeping, the guy offered me this job to be a contractor, in a sense, military contractor. And so that created a whole new life for me, and the way I understand how things work and all that, where, nothing is as it appears to be sort of thing. And so anyways, it kept going to the point where I am now. I've lived all across the country and in several places in the world. And so anyway, I started doing this contracting work. And then once I got too old to be that kind of guy, I started teaching people through some of my old connections. And we do that down in South Florida. And that's where it all really started as far as my contact.
And so let's talk about this contact and how it started. You said South Florida. The book really isn't specific on the location, and I don't know if you're comfortable with disclosing that or not. But if you're not, it's okay. But when I'm reading the book, I was like, "Where is this? I gotta know." But it's
Right.
but it's entirely understandable if you don't want to share that. And I will also ask you when, like, what year did this first contact occur?
It's 2 years ago. And so I started writing books right after that. That's where I wrote the 8 books in 2 years. And there's more coming. One's almost ready again. But it happens in very South Florida, the Glades, let's say. You're 100 miles from anything. So it's really hard to locate. And it's done legally and everything. But basically, we train, soldiers to become warriors, something more than they are. And we teach them what being a contractor is versus what the military they were in. But we're in a pure swamp area, and it's all on the coast, but nobody will ever find it.
Right. Okay. And so while you were training, you were hiking through the Everglades, and you stumbled across this woman, and that's where the story starts. So can you share that?
Oh yeah. It was really strange. A lot of times when I'd be down there, and before I'd go home or whatever, because they would helicopter me in and then they helicopter me out. So it's the only way in and out of there, unless you want to walk 100 miles through the swamp, and which there's a reason for that. But a lot of times I would go out on a hike in the swamp, because to me, most people would see it would be smelly. It's mucky, and it's really difficult moving through there. And there's a lot of things that can kill you, right? But for me, it was beautiful, because it was so foreign, right? It's like you're in another world when you're down in the middle of the swamp. And so I would go on hikes a lot of times out through the swamp and check it out, look for where the panther tracks were and that sort of thing. And this one time I'm walking along, and I look up, and I'm in the middle of the swamp, and I see this beautiful blonde lady, and she's got like this light blue jumpsuit sort of thing on, and she's hung up in the mangroves. And if you don't know what mangroves are, they're like the roots of the tree are out above ground, right? And everything around it is what we call the suck, because when you step in it, that's what happens. You'll go down to your knee sometimes and get stuck, and it's really hard to get out, right? And so anyways, I see her struggling over there in that mangrove, and she's hung up. And so I'm thinking to myself, what am I seeing here? This doesn't fit the picture at all, right? And so I start making my way over, because just as if I would see an animal out there or something, I would try to free it, and which I've done on several occasions. And so anyways, I figured, well, whatever's happening, maybe I smelt something or whatever, but there's something real here. And so I made my way towards her, and it did it very cautiously. And I could see her kind of winch at times, kind of afraid and everything. So I got close to her, and so I sat down on a rock and next to her, and I started to smoke a cigar. And when I went and looked at her directly all the time, but just stayed within proximity of her and let her get comfortable with me. And then I pulled out my knife, and it's a pretty big knife, so it's kind of intimidating. But I kind of showed her, through hand movements, what I was going to do. Is going to help cut her free, because the way she was wedged in there, that would be the easiest exit out. And so, anyways, I then placed the knife on the edge of the tree and kind of pushed it towards her, and then stood back. So I let her, she could inspect it and stuff and see what my intent was. And so, it was very cautious at first. And so once she got more comfortable, I helped free her. And then when I tried to pull her out, I noticed, her leg wasn't working right. So she either fractured it or something. And so, I wasn't going to let her be just like that. And so I kind of made motions about, I could carry you, to wherever you need to be. And I'm still in my head thinking, I must be psychedelic or something. This is too strange. None of this fits, right? Your paradigm. But I said, I might as well go with it. That's the kind of person I am. Just go with it. And so anyways, she allowed me to pick her up. And when, she was like 5'10" or so, and she was real trim. And so I expected her to be, around 100 pounds or whatever. But when I picked her up, I almost threw her over my head because she was so light. And it was because they can adjust that, their weight. And so I didn't know that at the time. But anyways, I just went with it again. And so as I carried her, she kept pointing the way. And we came to this one place. There was a mound there. And at the time, I didn't really understand Indian mounds, but this was an Indian mound. It's full of shells and broken tools and stuff. And the area didn't have anything growing on it, but it was rather large, like semi-truck size and stuff. So anyways, she, motioned for me to put her down, and I did. And when I did, she was like, move back. So I stepped back a little bit, and I looked back, and I saw this blue light come down from nothing, but there's like something above her, but it was like part of an image, of the bottom of something, and she was gone. And that was my very first experience. And I couldn't get through my head, for the next week or so, what just happened, until the next time.
Yeah. So this is
that's incredible.
Completely human looking, I guess, Nordic type of extraterrestrial, what we would call Nordic. And if you saw her in public, she wouldn't look any different than one of us, aside from subtle features, right?
Well, except for the eye, right?
Yeah. The eyes are really big, and I've taken her out in public and stuff, and we just used like sunglasses and stuff. Also, I took her to a mall, and it was kind of funny. I'm skipping way ahead, but you'll get the idea. Is she was watching people, and she was so excited. And we had this understanding at this time where, whatever, when she's here, she does whatever I tell her to do, and she doesn't change that. When I'm there, it's the same, right? She tells me what to do, and I can't change that. And so anyways, she was addicted to watching these people walk by with different clothes on. And anyways, she saw a girl with an earring and wanted an earring. And I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to get this done, right? And so, but I thought we could pass. So when she gets in there, their ears are a little bit more narrow. And so she had these glasses on, which you can't see the eyes very well. So I thought, well, we'll try it. And so the lady, when she pulls her hair back, and she goes, wow, I haven't seen an ear quite like that. And I go, yeah, she's really Nordic. And she goes, wow, I haven't had a Viking in here in a long time. And so it just passed through. That's how closely they are to us as far as what they look like in appearance.
Wow.
And I've learned through their I think it's their intestine. It's shorter, and they do have some secretion that comes through as through their skin, as far as what do you call it, their waist. But other than that, they are just like us.
Right.
Scary.
So let's keep the story going then. You dropped her off at the mound. She disappears in the blue light. You go back to your camp. What happens after that, and how do you see her again?
Well, it's about a few weeks later, I was out there and I wanted to go on a walk again. And as I'm walking, I really didn't have any intention of going back to where I left her, because I just figured either I imagined it all, or else that, because of whatever I was smelling out there in the swamp or whatever. But I just didn't have a drive to go back there until I got close. And when I got close there, I thought, yeah, I think I'll go check that out. And so I went over there just to look at what was there. Maybe I could see footprints or something. And all I found was cat tracks. And all of a sudden, this blue light shows up, and I'm standing in it, and boom, I'm on the ship. And when I'm on the ship, there's 6 of them there, and that was all the people, and it was a lab ship, and that's where I got to learn who she was. And it was kind of eerie because I'm standing in front of all these people who I know aren't of this earth, right? And they got these weird looks on their face. They don't really want to look at me directly, and I look at them one by one as I go across, and I get to Sam Jess, and she's like, "Hi," and stuff, and it's just totally out of place, right? And so I thought, okay, well, we'll see what we can do with this, and they just wanted to meet with me. Well, she did, and I didn't know who she was at the time, and she's the queen basically, and she wasn't at the time. She was still like a princess and stuff, but she was very curious about me and wanted to learn. And it was a distraction, which I go into in the books about what that meant and how it related to me. And so we started to communicate, and it got to a point where they were asking me so many questions of the same thing over and over and over again. Like they were asking me, like I was describing a man walking down the street without a shirt. And 14 hours later, they're still asking questions, because the way they see things completely, so that if they experience something like that, they actually know the situation that is in front of them. But I didn't quite know that at the time, but it got too frustrating for me. So, I said, I got to bail and stuff. And I went back home, and next thing I know, about 3 days later, Sam Jess is showing up. She just appears and in front of me, and which is another story I can tell you about. But it's like, where you been? And so I tried to explain it to her, and she wasn't quite understanding. So I had a sitcom on, and so I played the sitcom for her, and she would ask me questions as the sitcom was going through. It was a half-hour show, and then I would replay it, and I replayed it again, and I replayed it a third time and a fourth time. Finally, she goes, "Why are you showing me the same thing?" I said, "Because that's what I was going through on your ship for 16 hours, And so she understood. And then after that, it just took place, one thing after another. We just kept advancing in our relationship with the family, I call them.
So, man, there's so many questions, and I know the book answers a lot of them, but for the audience, who are these people? Where do they come from? And why are they even interacting with humanity?
Well, the intention was not to react with or react to us, which was a contact story, which I keep asking them if I could be a contactee, but they deny me. They say I'm too old. But they come from it's a planet, they call it Plejaren, or at least I've named it Plejaren, and they haven't told me different. And it's about 80 light years past the Pleiades. And so I think that's about 400 and some light years away from Earth, I believe. And, so I had lots of questions about that. I don't necessarily ask them questions. It's more important to me to know who they are and build relationships with each of them. And it's kind of funny because I don't really have time to ask any of the questions people would seem to ask. And they're kind of mute questions, because if I don't ask them, I find out the answer later without having to ask the questions. But the way I'm seeing it is the pure truth rather than it being explained to me. A lot of people would ask me, I go ask them about the pyramids and stuff like that. Well, it's kind of funny. It's like, yeah, that's just not my thing, right? I'm not a UFO conference kind of person. But what has happened is over a period of time, I learned about who we are, what we are here, what they know, what they've been imparting to me, such as we're not really here. We're a projection. There's no such thing as time. There's they travel by frequency, not by, they're not moving anywhere. It's like one moment you're here, the next moment you're here. They don't use wormholes and things like that. And they've showed me things about like how, there was no Big Bang, there's no dark matter, and then the explanations for those things. But these all just happened to come up, without me having to ask certain questions. But
Yeah.
am I answering the question?
Yeah.
There's just so much information.
You are. You have a question, Aaron?
So in the book, it says that they were here just kind of studying Earth, and humans are just a part of Earth. So they were also but they weren't necessarily, other than that, interested in humans, and they didn't really want to interact with us. And when you interacted with some Jazz, is that how you pronounce some J's?
Yeah, some Jazz.
That was almost like an accident, like it wasn't supposed to happen, right? And then you formed a relationship with first her, and then with everyone on the ship, and then that kind of like changed you and them at the same time. And then now they're suddenly more interested, not just you, but in humanity in general. So how did that change? I mean, I guess this is a big question, but how did that change them? Did that change their mission at all, or did that how did that impact them?
Well, there's a lot to that question.
Right.
Like she's the princess, right? And there's this lady called Mother who was really good friends with her mother, the other Semjas. And after she passed, she was basically the one to raise her, and her destiny was to become the queen again, right? Like her mother. And she did everything possible throughout her life to avoid that. She didn't want to be that person. And so she became an expert at so many different things, right? And she got on this lab ship, and the captain himself saw this as a major challenge. I mean, it could make or break his career, so to speak. I mean, there's no monetary thing. It's all about self, right? And the families. And so she got on this lab ship, and the captain was mainly there to take care of her. But then there was other people on this ship, which I call my family, that didn't really know each other and such. And they had their own job to do, thing that they wanted to do. And they study certain things about the Earth and all that. So it was nothing about contact. And so one day, that's when she went out. She wanted to go out into the swamp. And the captain knew he couldn't stop her. She's a wild child sort of thing. And she's looking for a distraction to keep her away from what her destiny is, right? And that's how she ended up stuck out in the swamp. And then how when we met each other, at any time, I didn't know this at the time, but any time she could have been gone back on the ship, the captain could have took her back. But she refused to do that. She wanted to see how things played out, until there wasn't a reason to stay.
Right. And not just to stop real quick. That's what I was saying. I'm like, why couldn't they have just easily rescued her from the, like they could easily have just done that, but they didn't. So that explained, because she didn't want to. Okay.
Yeah. She wanted to see how it played out, again, looking for a distraction, and so it, it worked out that way. But their intention wasn't to make contact. They saw people as monsters and violent, like we went a bear in the woods, right? When we faced, that's how they saw us. And that was what the perception was. We are not even close to becoming ready for actual contact in the sense of a large thing. They showed me several scenarios, and none of them work for us. And, what they were doing was they were allowing me in because they could talk to the uppers from them, and they wanted to see where this goes, and so they started to explain to me what contact is that they do. And that is about changing our consciousness, because if we can change our consciousness within 50, 80, 100 years from now, we may have a potential of actual contact. So what they do is they find these kids around the world that they don't have fear of them and stuff. And, in other words, fit the checklist, I guess. Mm-hmm. And they start teaching them, and they teach them the things of unconditional love. And they start to experience these things and have the abilities that other people don't. And the idea is they'll never become teacher or never explain and show off their talents, so to speak, that they're learning, but they will just be as they are here on Earth. And when people see their abilities and things that they do, the hope is that they will, because we're attracted to positive and we're repelled by negative. And these kids are purely positive and come from unconditional love. And so hopefully that's an addiction where it's a 100th monkey thing, where one sees another and that shows the next person, the next person, the next person, until it becomes a change in our consciousness.
Right. So yeah, that's one of my favorite parts about this whole story is that, it was more about you getting to know who they are individually. And you had no interest in you had no interest in, going around and bragging that you've been in contact with these beings and all this stuff. And at one point you actually did get to meet some other earthlings, other humans that were also in contact with them. And they explained the difference between you and them. And would you mind telling that story and what the whole purpose of that was?
Yeah, there's more than one thing related to that, but initially, it was a weird thing. Where our bond how we became a family in a way was that they were being pressured to ask me to come to them, the higher ups, I guess is what you would call it, the people more experienced with this, because they saw that there was something happening between me and the family that was unique and that they hadn't experienced before. And none of these people had any training with meeting other beings, right? Other than the ones that are within the realm that they connect with, which is a whole nother story. It's called natural law. That's why there's no bad aliens, right? Because it doesn't fit. But so anyways, they offered me to go there. And I asked, the family was getting a little disturbed, and it was actually bringing the family together because they didn't really know each other. And that's not really a thing with these people. They find a clique to hang out with in a sense, but through their works, which is a whole nother story. But anyway, so anyways, it got to the point where Sam Jess was really getting mad at the command because they wanted to take me from them. And so Sam Jess just turned and asked me, "What do you want?" I says, "I don't care about that. I want to be with you people. I prefer to understand and experience you guys." And so suddenly that just changed everything about the dynamics of the comfortability and such with the other people, members of the crew. And we sort of bonded at that moment. But later down the road, once that was already established, that we're a family now, the command wanted me to meet these other people that were, contactees and stuff. And they wanted to see why they were not being able to make headway with them in a sense. And so I call them UFO conference people, which is not a bad thing, but it's just these people have the interest one way, right? Rather than a larger thing, which is like love. Yeah. Love's boring, right? But more interesting is, aliens and the types of ships that they have and all these things. And so when I met with them, they took me to this place way out in the system. And people usually ask me, "Well, where were you in space?" And it's like asking somebody in a small boat in the middle of the ocean, "Where are you?" It's so vast, right? So anyways, I meet these people and they were all nice people and everything, but they were like a little older, like 20s, 30s, and a little higher. And I just could not connect with these people because I asked them, "Well, how do you feel about, like meeting these peoples and stuff like that?" And they really wasn't interested in my questions. And they were so consumed with finding out the next big thing, right? That's going to happen to the earth with the aliens. That was where their focus was. And I just had zero connection with them. And so when they asked me to do that, they were studying me and they were studying them. And later, several books later, it's kind of funny. I think of this as a long period. It's only been 2 years since I've met them, but they introduced me to a new crop of people that they used the information of me meeting these people, these contactees with these new people, since they changed their method. And they were so much fun and they were a lot younger. And I really got along with them. I was able to connect with them and stuff. So I guess there was like a bump in the system, so to speak, about how they were approaching us, because they really don't know us. They fear us more than anything. So anyways, that's how that came about.
Yeah. And that's beautiful. And I do think it's interesting. At one point you said, I guess they can predict future probabilities or future timelines. And they told you that part of the reason they were so interested in you was because they didn't see you in the future. And your accidental contact was like an anomaly. So it was of interest to them. And that was one of the reasons that they allowed it to continue, correct?
Well, at first it was because Sam Jess's obsession with knowing who I was. And because there was something weird that we found out later, that we were connected in some way. And that's what led to me understanding about so much more, in the process. But I developed, at first she was the only one that really was comfortable with me. And then as it progressed with this group of people that just was on the lab ship that had no, training in this sort of thing, we all started to really bond, and we became like really friends. And then we became family. And I introduced some things to them that they weren't familiar with. And one thing you got to understand is these people, I call them like lab rats, right? Because they weren't part of, they're like, if there was a government, right, they would be the military. They have a standard look, the blonde hair, the blue eyes, and they wear a uniform sort of thing. But they're a lot different than the common people of the Plejaren society. And I didn't know that at the time, but I found out later, which are completely different. They're not all, blonde and stuff, and they can do so many different things with their outlook or their looks and the clothes that they wear. But I didn't know that at the time. And also they're more friendly, right, than the people that are in service. And so I introduced like shaking hands, and one thing led to another. They thought that was really cool, and so every time I'd go on a ship, I had to shake everybody's hand. And then I introduced a hug to them, and that just took off to a whole nother level. And it's gotten to the point now where when I go on the ship, what the hug really represents, it's like, I make fun of it. Like, I know when I go on the ship, it's like, oh God, I'm going to spend an hour hugging these 6 people, but what it happens is that I've learned, number one, love is magic. The things that we see as magic, like people walking through walls and all these things, those are all within our capability, but it has to come from love. And I keep redefining love. And so like when I hug them, it's like every time I hug them, we're catching up on the love that we had lost or passed since we last met. And so it brings us back up to date in a sense. And so that's where that all comes from. And it's like we just started introducing new things. And here's the funny thing is people always misread it because me and Sam Jess are kind of inseparable, and they kind of see things in a different way. They don't have sex or anything like that. And what we ended up finding out through a bunch of other things, mystical things or spiritual things that we went through in traveling, what we call traveling, is where both our essence leaves and goes places to learn different things or communicate in different ways. But we were a quantum entanglement. And I had no clue of what this quantum stuff was, right? I'm Homer, Homer of Earth. And so I went through a long process with learning what that all means. And a quantum entanglement is basically the opposite at another end. And so I always kid them, I got the looks and the smarts, and then Sam just got the rest. But it's obviously the opposite. But when these quantum things started happening, these visions that I was having in our travel, when we would leave our bodies and experience things, and the things that we would see, I was seeing like Tauruses and double Tauruses and things like this. That was just part of where we were, right? And I had no clue what all that meant. And so I asked a friend of mine who really knows, he knows quantum, right? And he would sit back and he'd just shake his head after I tell him the story. And he goes, "This is what I try to teach people." And so I'm experiencing the quantum. And what I found out was the quantum is basically all that we are.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know.
I wholeheartedly agree with you as far as love. I've said in the past, love is the highway to traverse dimensions, right? That frequency. And obviously I'm not I haven't perfected it, and most of humanity hasn't, but I do understand that that's what it takes. It takes dropping into your heart and experiencing unconditional love and operating from that heart space. So that's part of the reason this story resonated with me so much, is that it was a story of love. It was a love story. And you actually explain, you're wearing a shirt ending child sex slavery, so you rescue children as well, and you explain in a book that it was a child that you rescued that taught you unconditional love, when you looked in her eyes, and that's maybe what even primed you for this experience with the Plejarens.
Yeah, it definitely has made me different, I think, in a lot of ways because of what I witness and what we do. We don't really fit the mold, and because the mold doesn't allow for people to actually do what we do. And we saved over 3,000 kids, and all of them are destined to die. The people that I bring in, my team is, I have many volunteers from all religions, which is really cool, and they work together, right? That's how beautiful this is. And my team is like ex-military or ex-contractors and stuff, and all of them are broken in some way, and many of them have PTSD. And it's kind of weird when they go through one rescue or maybe takes two, the PTSD completely goes away and never comes back. And so I don't know how to really explain that, but I think they're replacing one horrific memory with one of total unconditional love. When you see these children and the condition that they are in and they've gone through, and then how strong they are, to bounce back and all. So anyways, yeah, it taught me a lot. And that leads me to like one of the reasons that they kept me around, right? They didn't kick me out, was required to be on that ship and to interact with them. I labeled it, I had to become naked. In other words, I couldn't hold anything back from them. And it was a real struggle for me because, here on Earth, when we're here, we have to have a different face in a sense for each person that we meet in order to be able to communicate with them. And up there, you had to be complete. You can't lie. You can't make white lies and things like that. You cannot even hide who you are. And so I struggled really hard with this. And because, you're letting everything out, and I'm in love with these people. These people are just so beautiful, and I just can't, it's hard to be away from them for any length of time. And so I don't want to destroy that. And so what they would ask me things like, they do like these scans when you go onto the ship and leave the ship. There's always this scan. The ship does that automatically, and they saw all the scars on my body. I've had 8 bullet holes in me. I've been cut. I can't count how many times. I've been left dead for 3 times, and so I have obvious, scars and or medals, in a sense. And they asked me about that, and I'm thinking to myself in my head, my God, they think of us as monsters, and they've allowed me to be here this long, and they're showing me so many things that it's just incredible, right? It's something I don't want to leave. I'm addicted to now. And if I tell them this, what's going to happen? If I don't tell them, I already know what's going to happen. And so like one time when they were confronting me with this, I said, it's life on Earth, right? Things like this happen. A lot of times, when you stand for those who can, you have to put yourself in harm's way, and they're still not really getting it. And so by that time I had started to use like movies and stuff in order to help them understand, and they could ask me questions, and it was a lot easier when they'd watch it and then ask me a question rather than me just try to speak something. So Sam just grabbed me by the arm, and she's like dragging me away, and she goes, "You're going to show me." So I said, okay, well, I picked the movie Taken, and I explained to her, I said, this is not me, right? But this is an example how this guy, they took his daughter and what he went through in order to find his daughter and get her daughter back. I said that would kind of explain a lot of, what I'm talking about and where these scars come from. So we're laying in her bed, and there's this like thing that they pull over, and like there's a screen that I could see. And so she played the movie, and I'm thinking it's just me and Sam Jess, right? And so as the movie's going on, she's getting so emotionally attached to what's going on in the movie, crying and getting close to the screen. I start hearing noises outside in the other parts of the ship. Here, everybody was watching. I didn't even know it at that same time. When it came down to the end, I mean, she had her face right up into the screen and was watching it. And that helped. That was one hurdle. And then I would come across another hurdle like that about being absolutely naked with these people. There was nothing I could do to hide anything. But each time it was like, my God, I'm going to lose these people if they find this out about me. But after that movie, it was a kind of a weird kind of experience. We got out of the bed and we go out into what I call the living room. I call it the ship and RV, right? It's easier to explain, the place of the ship. I try to do that, make it easier for me to remember and for them or for anybody who reads it. But we go out there and they're all standing there and they're all like very emotional. And they started to put their hands on my shoulders and my head and everything. And right away, I started to think about all the times I've been in churches and did a speech, and there would be pastors from several churches there, and they would come up and do the hands-on and pray for me. Well, this was very, very similar to that. They all just kind of surrounded me and put their hands on me, and I fell to the ground, to my knee, and I could just feel this release, right? And I don't know what that came from, what that really means, but I think it was because I finally allowed all this stuff out of me, which led to so many other things that opened up for me and what they've showed me and allowed me to see. So, anyways, I thought that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. And they also offered to help heal some physical aspects of your body with their technology, correct? And that was an amazing experience for you.
Yeah, only in to show me, because they couldn't heal me. It's like there's rules, right? And there's rules we can't cross, we can't discuss or argue. But they wanted to show me a technique that they have where it's not. They don't really need a doctor, but they'll have somebody that's experienced with this machine and stuff. And it was kind of like a light that just entered into, like I had a torn ligament or whatever in my arm where I only had like 10% mobility in this arm from an injury that I had, and it wasn't enough to do surgery on, and it was not they couldn't do it, they said, but it still limited me. And so I just felt like somebody's finger touching me, and next thing I know, I have full mobility of my arm, and it was that fast. So yeah, it's quite different. They just wanted me to be able to experience, to know what it was all about.
Yeah, that's incredible. So Sam Jess, this is also the same name of the person I guess Billy Meier was in contact with. Is there any connection there? I mean, I know the answer from reading the book, but can you explain to the audience?
Yeah, she's the daughter. Sam Jess.
So she's the daughter of the woman that Billy Meier was in contact with. So all that was legitimate, because a lot of people think he was a fraud.
Well, I don't want to go there. All I can say is there was two contacts, one to say hi and one to say goodbye, and they were very tight-lipped about saying any more about it. So when that kind of thing comes up, I don't press it.
Sure.
So
no,
my experience, this is my experience, right? And that's the one I know. So that's the one I speak of.
Yeah, no, I respect that. I know people were going to ask if there was any connection, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is what they told you when you asked, or when you mentioned it. They said, "Oh, she's named after her mother, who was in contact with Billy Meier." Yeah.
Yeah. Later on, I have an experience with her mother, and because it comes about like who we really are, and what they know us to be, such as like me and Sam Jess, our quantum entanglement. Basically, we live on planes of existence, right? What we would call our past lives or future lives. We see it as human, right? Not all of them are human, but or as this is, which I also go into in detail from what they taught me. But where was I? I forgot where I was. Lost train of thought. Oh, we're not really here, right? On what we call Earth, we're a projection, and each of our lives is a projection, and each one of those lives would be a plane of existence. We are I was on one plane of existence, and Sam Jess was another plane of existence, because I am her, she is me. We're quantum entanglement. But what happened is that our planes of existence came together, and we found each other, and we've been able to prove that we are, because we are the same person. We were able to date it and the whole things. And it's kind of funny, her birthday's the same as mine. That was that was something I couldn't do, the calculations, because she's not from this solar system, right? And so they provided that for me, and she's 264. I'm 64, right? She appears to be like 24, where I'm much older, but we are the same person. So we are a projection. And what comes from how I homerized it was that there's consciousness, right, up in space, and he's this great big guy. He's sitting on this big lazy boy, and the floor is a puzzle board, and that puzzle board are fragments of the consciousness, and each of those fragments has an essence when we come here to be projected. And so, in a better way to understand it, consciousness is sitting up there watching a TV, right? And there's like 7 of these TVs going on. Each one of them is like us, or the fragment of one. And so it's a TV series. And when what we see as death, that TV series is over. Mm-hmm. And then I always kid with Sam Jessich, when we brought our planes of existence together, we became one TV series rather than 2, right? And when we pass, we don't return. We just now have become, we never die either. But our projection in the lifetime we're on the plane of existence is over. We are back, that fragment, the essence that was on that fragment is now in what I would call like a library, where it's accessible anytime. That's why when you see these ghost shows, they'll actually make communication, like Lizzie Borden or something, and I can't think it's one of her relatives is talking to her, right? And they had this conversation. Well, they're seeing it as though she is in her time, right? Mm-hmm. Speaking. In reality, she's, not in time, because time doesn't exist. She's right there, right now, alive, speaking to her or speaking to them. But that's what people don't understand. So one time, and how I came about this was some of me and Sam Jess's travels. We are in this space where her mother appeared, and we had an experience with her. And then again, we had another experience with her where she's physical. I was able to touch her and feel her, and that's because she's still alive, but she's not a projection at the moment. Or if she is, it's on a whole nother level, which I haven't even discovered yet. But that's where it goes back into quantum, where, go ahead.
No, it's all extremely fascinating and deeply resonating. And then when you say Sam Jess and then you are on different planes of existence, there's one part in the story where you're allowed to see their space fleet, like their fleet of ships, right?
Yeah.
And the way it's explained, the way at least I understood it, is it was like here but out of phase, essentially. Like their fleet was already parked here but not in our reality. Is that how am I getting that right?
No, it was in our reality.
Oh,
it wasn't our reality, but I'm still questioning whether it was Earth, but it sure seemed like it was here. I had no reference, right? So I can't really explain that, except for it really felt like it was here, and I believe it was here. But they allowed me, to roam about to a point, because that was like a gift to me, so I could see their ships and things.
So I guess that's my question, is that wouldn't be visible to the rest of us that are here, or it would be like in a pocket bubble or something.
It would be totally visible. It'd be just like if somebody was parked in the middle of nowhere and you walked up on them.
Oh, okay. So it's just out in such a remote area that no one would see them.
Yeah, they know things. Like, it's just like if you see a UFO, it's because they don't care that you see them. If they don't want you to be seen, you'll never ever see them.
Right. There's many different ways they can cloak themselves. Right.
But so that if it is here, that's even more fascinating to me, that they like an outpost here essentially then. And they're not just in their craft, but they're actually on the surface as well, which is very interesting.
It was a meeting of a lot of people, but that's the thing is, they know how not to be seen or disturbed, because then that would cause a problem. If somebody else walked up and saw what was going on there, that would be an issue for them and for us. in a lot of ways.
Now, have they tried to communicate with our government?
No, they're like, they explained to me that, there are beings that are here that involve themselves with the government. And it's a kind of an easy way for them to exchange things, because otherwise they'd be chasing them. So instead of being chased, right, you give them something to do. And that's what they're doing. And so they allow it to be examined and things like that. And often there will be times when they need a part, maybe not so much, but they need a part for their ship or something. So what they'll do is they'll give it to, like the military, in order to create that product for them, or that part. And in that process, they're getting, what do you call it? They're learning about, how certain things work. But they never give them something that would interfere with who we are and the path that we're on.
Right.
So that's more of a distraction. There are other beings, many other species that I've met and that are here, that come here and visit. There was a couple that I met that lived here for 6 years, and I call them Vulcans. And I get, I do that in my book, right? Something that I can relate to, and something that the reader could relate to, so they understand. They do look a little bit like, like the Star Trek Vulcans. And it's kind of funny. I asked them if they had ever watched it, and they said, yeah. And I says, well, was it a comedy or a drama to you? And they said a little both, but it's interesting how many of them are here that we don't even know. And it's just like I was explaining how I took Sam Jess to the mall. It's been more than once. And to watch how the female gene is common throughout the universe. I can tell you that, because of watching her reactions and stuff. And I also, one of the things that happened to me while exchanging, like going to a place where they were and going to a place or bringing to a place, right? Me and Sam Jess at the mall and such. And I'm wondering, I see how closely related we are, and how something within us is so similar. And experiencing that, and I'm going, what are they getting from me? Why are they keeping me around? And then it dawned on me, the same thing that I'm seeing through their eyes, they're seeing through my eyes when I'm experiencing something there. There's one of the scientists on the ship is named Hans. He looks like a surfer dude, right? He's big and everything, and he's just so much fun. And he always gets me in trouble up there. And, we have the same kind of mind, right? And so that's what I found out was, that's what I'm giving them is exactly what they're giving me. So there's an equal exchange on everything, emotions and love and understanding and all these different things. They showed me things that are like him especially, how to create energy, and how we already have patents on the same thing here on Earth, but it came out at the same time as solar, and solar is so dirty. And he was trying to understand to me, why would you choose solar where you have all this contamination, all these bad things that come from that, and is very inefficient in its abilities? And when you have, what this is. And he showed me this little canister, kind of like the tubes that you put in the bank, to send your money in. He throws it out the ship. He leaves it out there for like a half hour or so and brings it back in. What it did was it collected light. And then he takes that light that it collected, places on a thing, and crushes this cylinder till it's really small, till it's like the size of a battery for like a power tool. And with that tool, with that thing, it's absolutely like, I go, what does it do? And he goes, or she goes, look at your phone. And I looked at my phone, and my phone was charging. And it has no effect on our bodies. There's no waste from it. And like he said, one of these little things that, again, we have the patent for that hasn't been used. He goes, one of your big stores, because there's another story about when we went to a Petco, but he says you could put that on their roof, power the entire thing for 8 years with this one thing.
Yeah.
And everybody that walks in there, if they have an electronic device that needs charged, it charges. And it's completely clean. So you can imagine what something that small, that easy to collect, that we have the capability of, we could be using.
Yeah.
But that goes into a whole nother story.
Because the dark controllers don't want that stuff out, because then that frees humanity, and they don't want that. I mean,
Right.
to put it very short and
Yeah.
simple.
So another
They
question.
don't have a monetary.
Been around for a long time. Tesla and way before Tesla.
You said they don't have a monetary system. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So because they're the way they're born and raised and stuff like that, it's natural. That's part of natural law, which is really the most important thing. Why they're not destructive aliens, and because it's all about balance, right? Everything's balanced. I tried to look up. See, I've redefined so many different words because I didn't have an act. I don't know, and nobody else knows how to describe it. Like when I look up natural law, I see two types of definitions: one science, one nature, right? Well, natural law is basically the key to the universe, and because like there's these people I call them bug people, right? They're the scary looking aliens and stuff. Well, the people that I hang out with are more humanoid. They have differences, of course, but all of them look like us and all. But we can relate, we can speak to each other and stuff. But the people that I call bug people, they're pretty scary. And I know they assured me they don't harm nobody or nothing, but their communication is very difficult with them because they are a lot like insects, where they have more of like a hive mind, but then they understand and they all work together. And so, like, say they're harvesting for a planet for certain materials, soils, stuff like that. Well, they know under natural law, you're not going to destroy a planet or alter a planet by taking the resources. So they have limits, right, of how much they can take, but they take all that they can without affecting that planet in any way. And so the story would be that they would then share what they don't need at the time with the humanoid type people. But that's about the limit that there is between that type of being and the humanoid type being.
Right.
So I think that was important to understand. And, like, there is no negativity in a sense of, natural law answers everything. It's the path of least resistance, where there's no destruction. Like when they terraform a planet, they'll go through so many different ways of looking at that planet where they can alter it to a point, but not to a point where it would be different than what it could do itself. And like when you see like your dark black holes and stuff like that, that's actually a rip in the fabric where a universe or a solar system was born. And they showed me how and told me how that goes through. And I write that in the book too.
Wow.
But anyway.
So that brings me to my next question. You were allowed to go for a ride on one of their pods, which you said looks like a Tic Tac, which I find very interesting because of the whole Tic Tac thing that, we know about that our government disclosed. But they said, well, for one, let me rewind a little bit. Whenever you first went on their craft, you thought you were in space. And they said, no, if we were in space, you wouldn't see the stars. And I thought that was very interesting because we know of all the old moon photos and stuff that people try and say are a hoax because you don't see any stars in the moon photos. So can you maybe explain why that is, that you don't see the stars in space, but you do see them in the upper atmosphere?
Well, you're talking to Homer here, but there is stars in space, but it depends where you are and what the thickness of it is, right? Like here on Earth, it's very easy to see the light from the stars and planets because we have filters, right? It's almost like wearing a pair of glasses where we're able to see. Where out in space, the distance is so vast, but there's no filter. There's no traveling of the light per se as it would be here, what we perceive to be. And so in a lot of places in space, there's nothing to see. One of me and Sam Jess's favorite things is my room up there. She put in a loft where we can lay in this bed, and there's like a glass above us, but you don't see the glass. It's nearly invisible, but you can put your arm up and touch it, right? So it's almost as though you're in space. And so a lot of times we'll ask the captain to take us to a place where there's something to see, right? That's where we can see stars. When there's what you call a bunch together in space, you can see that without the air. But yeah, so on Earth, it's easy to see, but in space, it's not so easy to see always.
Wow.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I've always said that too, because that's one of the big arguments. People are like, why is the sun hot? Why can we see all this stuff? And why is it apparently cold when you get out into space? And that's, that's a whole other discussion, but it does explain a lot, and that's the way I've always perceived it. The atmosphere acts almost like lens, like a magnifying glass effect in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you also, that pod also was able to go underwater, and you were able to experience the depths of our oceans where most people don't get to go. Can you explain what you saw down there?
Well, at that time, just recently, I actually visited a underwater city, but at that point, she took me down just to show me, right? And when we enter the water, there's no splash or nothing, and there's no resistance to it because I call it a plasma field around the ship. But anyway, it's called PI, not or because when I fly, I'm an astronaut now. That's what I keep telling everybody because I got to fly one and I got to solo. And it has to do with PI, a lot of it, because the way you jump and everything. But anyway, when we went down there, she took me, it was off of Hawaii somewhere, far out in the ocean, but we went down into a ridge, where the canyon walls were like this underwater. And we went down real slow, and she wanted me to meet these beings, which I think they're the ancient ones. They're millions of years old. And which is a whole nother story. I got to meet with them too. Communication was very difficult. That's why Plejarens were kind of taken over for that sort of thing. But anyway, we're going down, and I see on the wall, she said to look at that wall. And I start to see the wall, the canyon just open up into like a big rectangle, and this green light showing through. And as it comes down, it was green in the background. And I see these beings that a lot of people call grays, but they looked a lot larger. And they were looking out and they waved, to me as we passed through. And that was friends of hers. She just wanted me to see that, to be able to experience that. And, I think she knew that in future, that's what I would be meeting them. So what was it you said earlier?
No, go ahead.
What it was, I wanted to mention that you had mentioned. This is kind of important. I think it'd be interesting to people. Is like you said, they can see the future. Well, not necessarily see the future, but for instance, how they move through space, right? It's not propulsion or anything else. And it's like they come to my apartment, right? And we go to the ship. It's such like stepping out of one doorway into another. That's all it is, one step. When they move from one place to another, maybe 500 light years away, what they do is the ship is able to see the frequency that exists in a certain location where they want to go. And they can map because everything has a unique frequency. So I know exactly what that frequency is, and they can see it to a point that it's going to be before we get there and after we get there. Then the ship itself becomes that frequency of the frequency where they want to go. And so they don't go anywhere. They just become that other space.
I've heard that from multiple different people as well, that exact thing you just said. And are you familiar with Bashar at all? Darul or Bashar?
Florida, but I'm not real familiar, but I know the name.
Okay. So Darul channels Bashar, and that's supposed to be an Asasani ET. That's, like you said, Sanjazi is like an aspect of you. It's like the same thing that he says, that this being it's him, but it's an ET from what we would perceive as the future. Anyways, what came through once was exactly what you just said. Somebody asked, how do you guys travel? And he said, everywhere in space has a specific frequency, and we just match that specific frequency, and then we're there instantly. Mm-hmm. So it's like we don't travel the distance of point A to point B. We just instantly go to point B by matching that frequency, and then we're there.
That's exactly
awesome. What you said.
I have to check that out.
It's exactly what you just said.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people that they said validating everything that they're talking about when they're talking about aliens and stuff, and it's like, that's cool.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that's kind of what I was trying to say earlier, is like the heart is the highway to traverse dimensions. And I guess dimension would just be another frequency. But I always liken it to a radio, right? And you can just dial into that frequency and boom, you got that song or whatever it is. It's the same thing. So can you explain a little bit about this underwater civilization that you got to encounter?
Yeah, it was incredible. I love the ocean as it is, right? I mean, like when I do my job down at Glades, when we introduce them, the helicopter drops about 20 of us, 14 to 20 of us out in the ocean, 14 miles offshore, and we take them in. And so I'm kind of addicted to ocean and water and stuff. And so when I had this opportunity, it was freaking awesome. I get to go see this underwater city, right? But it wasn't anything like I had expected, and which is pretty much everything, right? When we went down there, we flew this shuttle or whatever into the water. Well, it's a spherical ball. That's another neat thing, is this one ship that they have. I never really see saucers ever. I mean, I haven't seen them any. They tell me that there are some, but it's very rare when the aliens use a saucer, which I thought was interesting. But the sphere that we were in, I've been in before. I call it tiles. It circles all around the sphere, which you've probably seen them on videos before. But these tiles, each of them have like what I call sacred geometry, a symbol on it. And what that does is instantaneously, or just prior to, like when they go into the water, you don't see any ripples or nothing. And that's because they just become the water frequency. And then like as they pass through a mountain, the same thing, where that inner space where they are is not affected, but the outside becomes the material that is external. And so anyways, we take this down into the water and we go down and enter into this like warehouse, I call it. And there was all these other ships there that I've never seen anything like before, because they kind of glowed and they had different colors to them and everything. And they just looked like natural things. And when I found out, I had to use some big words. I actually had to go to Hans when I wrote my notes to realize the words, but bioluminescence, I think, is one, where they react to different types of light and they mimic other type of beings like that's in the water, natural beings, coral and everything else, right? And the animals. Propulsion is done more like a manta ray or a dolphin, where the same propulsion systems that are used by, in other words, they're mimicking nature in everything that they do down there. And so anyways, we got in this ship and to go to another place, and the beings that were there, the main type species that was there, which they were able to relate to me, which was really cool, because they looked a lot like us, except for they had gills, webbed hands, webbed feet. When I was born, I had gills, webbed hands, webbed feet. And so we kind of bonded in that sense. And they're able to breathe underwater, but for only like 3 hours at a time. And we got all this like so deep in the ocean, right? They are in a very deep area. And it seems open and plain, like we should have discovered it by now. And when we're down there, you'd think the pressure would be high, but it was normal, like you would be near the surface. And so they explained how they keep the pressure at the same all the way up and until it meets its own pressure above. And how that's why different species of fish are there. Also, there was light down there at the bottom where there shouldn't have been any light. But as they told me, that particles of water all contain light, or refractions or reflections of light from the surface. And so what they do is they create the environment in order to amplify that light, which creates the light within that space. So it's like you would be, 30 feet deep rather than, thousands of feet deep. Everything that they do, it mimics it. Like there was a Plejaren there, and she took us to the place where she stays while she's working there. And as you walked in the room, it's really cold right down there. And when we walked into the room, immediately it warmed, to meet our comfortable levels. And which is, there's a whole nother story behind that with other aliens. But anyways, it adapts to the individual that's in there, or the individuals. And also, as you walk through the rooms, they light up. And how they do that is all by natural, like beings that are in our oceans that create light, or bioluminescent light, are embedded within the walls, or replicas of such, and that creates the light, and it all happens naturally. It's just, there's so much about that. What else would you want to know?
I mean, it's unbelievable that. Well, for one, it's not unbelievable. Actually, I fully believe it, and I've always had an inner knowing that these underwater civilizations are real. And you said they had the gills and web feet and stuff. Have you ever, encountered mermaids? Are they real that you know of?
I don't know.
Right.
I
Okay.
met many species, yeah, but I haven't met anything like that yet.
Right on. Okay. And then side note, you spent a lot of times in the Everglades as far as skunk ape or Sasquatch. Are you familiar with that? And have you encountered anything like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting. There's certain things I can't tell, but what I've learned. But yeah, there's a skunk ape, and there is Sasquatch. I met Sasquatch in China, also along the Silk Road, when I was back, when I was doing the monk thing, and because one of the monks there that knew me wanted to introduce me to the Sasquatch, or Yeti, or whatever you want to call it. And it was interesting. And a lot of the things that I've seen on TV and stuff are actually real, like the smell. It's a heavy smell. But the one thing that I found that was unique is he's sitting across from us on a creek bank. He was on one side, we were on the other. And the other monks that were with us brought foods, vegetables and stuff fruits and stuff for him, and set it down so that he could meet with me. But it was like, I don't know how you call it. It wasn't telepathy, but I could see pictures in my head when that's how we communicated. I was sending him pictures I didn't know how to do that. It just happened naturally when he initiated it, with showing me pictures of like where he was, where he lives and things like that. It was unique. It was different.
Yeah.
But yeah, he smelled a lot.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like you've had quite an experience, an eventful life, even leading up to this experience 2 years ago. So, and I know you've done a lot of training, like with monks and stuff along those lines. So, in a way, I guess the way I see it is it was all training. Like you were basically preparing yourself for this experience on some higher level, I would say, because like you said, it takes a certain person to be able to even be allowed up there, right? And I don't feel like anything that you've done along the way has been by accident at all.
Well, it's interesting because I had two really important questions in my life about my life, right? Because I don't know how it happened, but I've done so many different things, right? And I don't call it by choice, right? It just happened. This is the next avenue for me, and this is the next avenue for me. I got these degrees, and they're really not of use to me. I don't follow that, and so I was kind of confused why my whole life I've done so many different things and experienced so many different things without really trying to go that direction. And when me and Sam Jess got to know each other better, her entire life has been just like that, where it's constant. And what we found out, and it was funny because I had this vision, which I don't have visions, but I was getting all these little like 2-second visions when I'd close my eyes. Like I would see like a tapestry, a world map, cloth world map on the wall that was over. And then I would see like a wicker chair, rocker chair, and it was gone. And then I would see like a portion of the ceiling where they have those decorative type curves where the ceiling isn't just square. I couldn't understand any of them. Then I had this really big vision. And one of the things that's really natural to me is interpreting dreams in a way for other people, not necessarily what they mean to them, but each little segment of that and what each of those segments represent, right? So I have a really good grasp on that. And I know a lot of those different keys, right? Oceans, house, and things. And anyway, in this vision, it's like kind of drizzly and rainy, and I'm walking up this worn out stairway into a house, and and I couldn't figure out any of the things that I saw on the spiral staircase, the candle at the top, the geometric shapes. I didn't understand any of it. And it's so funny is because that's what I know, right? And I couldn't put the house, even like the house is me, right? I couldn't put any of that together, couldn't connect any of it. So I called that one friend of mine that I call him the mad scientist, and I just described it to him real quick. I said, "What the hell does this mean?" And so he went on for a 45-minute rant explaining every detail of each of it. And he said that essentially what it was I'm on free time now. I had completed the things that I came here to do. So now it's my choice of where I go next. And it was like, I could have had a V8, sort of moment. It was like the light bulb come on. It's like, oh my God, that's exactly it. Because that's what I taught many people for so long from the teachings I learned in the temples, the pagodas. And then there was that was one part of a question I had in life, right? Is what was that all about? And to confirm that without any influence, right? Then there's this other thing is about why did I go from this to this to this to this to this? And Sam Jess starts to explain to me how, in our life, we visit certain things of our life and our past, the things that were connected to us, or fragments of our, the residue that's on our fragments and such. And that's why it takes us from one place to another. And then she goes, just like you, and hits me on the chest, right? I'm going, the hell she should say, here it is that what we're doing, just like she was, we have a tendency to visit our other projections, our other lives, right? Or our ancestors, as we call it, and to experience what they experienced so that we can bring all those things together and use them in one life. So, we're not just one person. We're not just one entity. We're not just one soul. We're multiple. And if we can bring all those memories together, that's the point of it. And that's what we're doing on a subconscious level is we're revisiting and trying to learn our ancestors' memories. And that's what a big thing that happened to her was learning her mother's memories.
Yeah, and that part, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that really resonated with me in a sense that if you're not careful on Earth, you can mistake that as your own memory, but we're tapping into a collective memory of a past life of an ancestor, right? And sometimes people are like, oh, I was King Tut, I was Cleopatra, I was King Louis. But I think it's like this blueprint of memories that we all get when we come here to help make the human experience, like to prime us for the human experience, because it might be difficult for our soul if let's just say it's our first incarnation. So when she explained that in the book, I was like, oh my gosh, that's what happens here, because there's no way hundreds of people all have the same past life memory. And some people really attach their identity to it and they don't know how to separate from it. But would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
None of this is complicated, but it's foreign, right? And that's one of the big things that they've taught me is how to look at things differently. And not by telling me to look at things differently, but they'll ask me certain questions. When I ask them a question, I'll ask, what about this? What about that? And then when I start to look at that, what I'm doing is I'm looking at things completely different than I had ever thought of before.
Right.
There's one thing that I'd like to mention before we run out of time or anything is sensing. One of the first things that I was taught by Sam Jess was how to sense. And it's kind of like the key to the universe and the key to soul, or whatever you want to call it. The first thing that you do is you feel like this heat, this ball of heat or whatever, and it enters into your skull, moves through your body and out your feet, and then comes back again and again and again, right? And you keep doing this over and over again, where that's the only thing that you have left within you is this sense of this ball moving through you, heat over and over and over and over again. When you get to that point, you keep that going, right? And then you recall a moment of unconditional love that you had, right? And you add that and you start replaying that memory. For instance, my go-to is the first time I rescued one of these little kids. It was a weird experience. And, I had this kid that was frightened on me. She's 4 years old. She was in this brothel. And I had kind of my garb on, right? And so there was this long ride that we had to go to get into what I call a safe house. And in that process, I kind of removed my garb as we went, but I didn't want to scare her. There's no other place that she could sit in the van. It was so crowded with the kids we rescued. And so she's sitting on my lap and she struggled all the way out to it. But once we were in there, she calmed down a little bit. But I didn't want to look at her. I tried to keep me so busy. And you know how it is when you start to feel like somebody's looking at you. And I made that mistake, or it was probably a good thing. But I looked where she was and I got, oh crap. And she's looking at me and our eyes met. And it was that moment that was complete of unconditional love that I felt for the first time in my life in that depth, right? So that's my go-to memory. So you got this ball moving through your body, and then you start to see this unconditional love, right? This moment, this memory, and you replay that over and over and over until it becomes real, till it's actually happening again to you. At that moment, everything opens up. And it's kind of funny, if you set an intent, it's probably the wrong thing to do, because you have already set the intent on a subconscious level of what you truly want. That's why, like, when people pray, they think it's a miracle when their prayer is answered. Not really. It's because when they pray, they don't usually say what it is that they truly want. And what you get is what you always, the every prayer is answered. You get what you really want. But we just don't recognize it that way. So if your intent is like, oh, I'm going to see aliens. If I get to that point, that's where I want to go. That's where I want to be. It may not be what you see. It's what you truly want and need in your life is what will reveal itself. But you can also access other people's energy, them being aliens or here. It's possible. And maybe that's your intent. But what you truly want is what you'll get. That's unconditional love.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. I couldn't agree more. And it makes a lot of sense with prayer. I came from a background where I never prayed. And the first time I did, it was almost immediate that I saw results, right? I guess you could say results, that the prayer was answered. But it was the very first time I had actually, I guess, set that intention, but subconsciously it had to have already been set now that looking back on it. So I fully agree with that. But you mentioned communicating or sensing someone else. I think in one of the parts of your book, you were, I guess, sky watching with her. You took her to a beach somewhere here, and you were seeing some craft in the sky. I guess what we would consider maybe satellites or something. And she explained to you, no, that's them, and showed you how to connect with them. And that's when she taught you sensing. Is that the moment it occurred?
Yeah, that was the first one. Yeah, and that was hilarious too, because it's like, and other people have asked me how to do it, and I tell them, and they says, okay, I've done the ball thing and I've done the memory. Now what? Well, that's the wrong question, because obviously you haven't done it yet, right? And because that has to become real. And so anyways, she was telling me to do that. And so we're sitting on my Jeep on this beach at Fort Myers Beach. And I'm looking at these things moving, and she said, yeah, I said, I want to talk to him. She goes, okay, well, do your sensing. So I'm doing the sensing, and I get to that point and I hear, hello, in my head. And I'm like in shock. It's like, oh my God, that just happened, right? And it was like somebody's right at your ear and they talk to you. And I looked right at Sam Jess, and I'm all excited and stuff. She goes, yeah, I heard it too. So, I mean, that was all I needed, right? To validate what it was that hey, they were having me do. And it has to come from love,
Right. And I think
Right.
you having the background you've had in training in martial arts and with the monks and everything you've done, it probably helped you adapt to sensing quicker than, I guess, somebody like myself or people, just anyone else out in the real world who's so distracted and disconnected. It might take a lot more effort than somebody who's been familiar with that type of meditative state, right?
Well, it's easy for anybody to do in the sense of going through the steps, but to stay with it is sometimes difficult for people because they're so much into the physical rather than to the spiritual, right? And it is two different things, but they're interconnected. So if we have random thoughts going through our head and stuff, that's the whole point of just like meditation, right? Is to remove all those things. And a lot of people think that you have to be setting. And well, one other thing before I forget, when I was with the Dalai Lama one time, he mentioned, you were talking about God or prayer and stuff. And he told me one time, he goes, there's only one God. And I go, oh, really? And he goes, yeah, but he has many names. And that just made so much sense to me, right? Because that's absolute truth. And, you don't have to know it, or you don't have to see it. You just learn to know it. But yeah, so what was we talking about? There's so much in my head right now.
Right. We were just talking about the sensing and having like that, being able to have that background of getting into that meditative state. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a matter of being focused and letting go completely and entirely. When you feel that ball, which is kind of funny because I learned a long time ago in the military, like these pilots in Vietnam, they would fly in to do these missions and they would be so busy in and out and work so many hours doing this that when they had their downtime, the 4 hours sleep or something, that's what they would teach them to do, is just feel a ball going through your body. So I thought that was kind of cool that, that came from them. But yeah, it takes time for some people. Just sense that ball and feel that warmth going through your body and out the feet, again and again and again until it becomes just like a ritual to you. And then, find that memory within you that, but don't let go of the ball that keeps going, right? So you got that going on. Now you add into that memory of unconditional love. It could be a pet for all, it doesn't matter. It's just that moment of unconditional love, a memory that's embedded within you. And then start seeing that happen again and again and again. And what happens is it starts to become real again. Everything becomes more like when I had that little kid on me, I could see the wrinkles in her dress, right? I hadn't noticed before and everything. And I was there again. And right at that moment, you open that door. And it's like I say, the magic, right? Love is the magic. And love isn't definable because it's ever expanding. When I started this, I thought I understood love. And then after I learned a lot more, I thought, yeah, now I know what love is. And then more and more keeps coming. It's undefined because it's so massive.
Yeah, we met.
And it's really funny. I told, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Yeah.
I was talking to one of my good friends and I said, I was going, I keep writing about love. I said, because it's the primary thing that's been happening. I said, that's not me. I said, and I think people are probably getting tired of me writing all that. And right when I said that, his wife come around the corner. She was outside eavesdropping. She goes, don't you dare. She goes, you keep writing about that. And it made sense to me afterwards. It's because it's not what most people perceive as love. It's very limited to them, where in reality, it's everything.
Right.
The ego tries to conceptualize love as one tiny specific thing, or what it thinks it knows, or because it's all it's experienced in this one lifetime or whatever. And it's like, that's why we have to get out of our egos. And that's when you can connect to the all that is, because it transcends that, right? The egos, this is like Dolores Cannon, if you know who she is. So she would, through her QHHT hypnosis sessions, it's the person's higher self coming through that has like the knowledge of everything. And then she can always tell when the ego tries to come through, or when the person's ego is trying to understand things or thinks it knows things. And she would call the ego Mr. Stupid, because the ego thinks it knows everything but knows nothing. And then you have the person's higher self which is really source, that does actually know everything, but isn't arrogant about it and doesn't have that, like, all the judgments of the ego and all that kind of stuff. And it's just very plainly saying these concepts, everything you just said about love, and that literally love is everything. Like it's the energy that makes up everything. It's what you could call God, love. It's the same thing. It's infinite energy,
right?
Infinite conscious energy. And that's who we are at the deepest level. And you can't separate infinite conscious energy, right? There's no separation.
Right.
So why there's no separation, that's why all is one, because there can be nothing but that one infinite energy. And then there's just these experiences that one energy is having, as you, as me, as Tyler. And time is an experience. Time is an illusion. It doesn't exist, like you said earlier. it's an experience that we're having. And then once this particular experience is done, you never actually left that one infinite energy. You're just having this experience and having an experience of time and space on a planet, but it's just an experience.
Yep.
And it's like, you know, but like you said, so that's how it can all happen simultaneously, because there is no time. It's all just happening in the now, which is eternal. Which is hard for us to wrap our minds around in this 3D experience, because that's like all we know is the experience of time, of linearity, of point A to point B, and this like limitation experience. But we're having the experience of limitation so that we can have that experience. Because if you never had an experience of limitation, how could you have that concept? Yeah. Right? It's like it gives us the contrast to like experience all the aspects of the eternal consciousness, God, whatever term you want to call it, source.
Mm-hmm. So definitely,
it's really philosophical indeed.
So definitely don't stop writing about love.
So definitely don't stop writing. Yeah. Moral of the story, because that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. You know.
Well, an important thing to understand about all that too is that when, like, say we have, let's just say there's a bad experience with an alien abduction, right? Well, you know, I don't want to argue about that with anybody, but let's say that you are asleep, right? And suddenly you're experiencing this thing that is so horrific that you've never seen before. Your brain has no reference for, and you see it as scary as hell, right? And so you're in and you're back out of it, right? And when you come back out of it, in order to retain that, you have to fill in the rest of the memory. That's what our bodies do in order to be sane, right? So we fill in the rest of that, but the only thing we know from that experience is scare. So the whole thing becomes scary. And so that's our experience, rather than if we went through the mind, there would be no fear. And that's how my Plejaren people, that's what I've discovered about them, because the mind reacts, allows the brain then to process what the reaction is, where we think about it, and then we have to have a reference in order to process. And if we don't have a reference to that, we're going to have to create something in our mind to keep that bridge together, right? And so that's what I'm learning about them, how they're so far advanced. Like when we swapped bodies, I'm in her brain, and one of the things she imprinted in there so that I could see it was, first thing was, I'm suddenly light. You know, I got these great curves and everything, but you know, my mind was so focused on being able to stand up, and I could hardly stand up. And then I'm suddenly having conversations with them while I'm seeing in my mind these 3 different mathematical equations that are processing out, right? Like somebody's figuring out calculations of something. So all this is happening simultaneously at one moment, and I'm able to have interaction with each one of those things. And so that's because it's coming from the mind, and it's allowing the mind or the brain to begin to process what it is that I'm experiencing. Where if, as a human being, what we know is to think and then find there's a story about the Indians, and they saw the ships coming ashore, right? They didn't see the ships because they had no reference to what that was.
Right.
So they didn't, until the people got out of it, did they have anything to be a reference to. So it didn't exist until, you know, they saw the people.
Right.
Because there was no reference. I think that's a really important thing. And it's hard for a lot of people to digest, but because, you know, we want to be in control, but, you know, to be in control is not to be in control.
Right.
You know, to allow things to reveal themselves to you is the key.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you never experienced a tree before, and it's like, oh, there's this thing called a tree, and you're describing it, and you're trying to, but you've never seen a tree.
Yeah.
Your mind would not construct it, like you wouldn't really know until you've experienced it. Then you're like, oh, that's what a tree is.
Yeah.
But you have to experience it to have,
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing about unconditional love is people think that they want that, but then they have to let go of a lot. And I'm speaking from experience. because I do set that intention and I want to experience that. And then what do I notice? I notice that I'm suddenly tested and tempted in many ways by our physical reality. And things come into my path that I'm forced to make a choice, and I have to sit with it and I have to understand now, is this, is this, will this allow me to experience unconditional love, or will this satisfy my ego? And a lot of times the stuff that satisfies the ego is very tempting. And that's where you have to really, like, you're being tested all the time and you have to be honest with yourself. And if you actually want to experience something, you're gonna be tested. And it's up to you whether or not you want to experience that truly, because we all tell ourselves things sometimes, but we don't actually mean it. And so it's just important to understand. And that's why your book connected with me so much, because it's something I'm striving for, right? And this physical reality is loaded with distractions, and just to have finally pick up a book that somebody's sharing from that heart space, it's something that I really connected with, and I just wanted to thank you for that. And there's so much more we could talk about. I don't know how much more time you have, but this has just been absolutely fascinating in my opinion.
Oh, it's so much fun. And see, that's why I don't, gravitate to these other sources to express things that I've learned and everything, that I just put it out in a book for, if somebody wants to find it, they do. And what I found it amazing is, I never intended of having these books for other people to read. It was just to satisfy my friends who kept asking me the same questions over and over again. I said, fine, I'll just write it down for you guys, in a sense. And I put it out there. And next thing I know, people are just demanding to know more. And it's like, well, there's nothing that I know that you don't know, but this is my experience, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm sharing my experience, and it's kind of hilarious to me. I didn't take any time. I don't do the formatting. I don't write the way I'm supposed to write. It's a diary. And so, I just, what I remember, I take notes and I write down what I remember and experiences of a lot of the things, but not all of them. There are things that I'm not supposed to say about, but generally it's like there's a lot of just downtime with them that I don't find that interesting. And so, but I have so many experiences, and I just write it down as I see it, right? It's what I feel. And what the feedback is that people are reading these books over and over and over again, and they're commenting on all the nuggets that I leave behind, which I don't have an intention for. But the intention that I have is just to express my experience and how I see it and what it makes me feel like. And it's awesome. And, I can't believe it. I'm not a writer. I wrote 8 books in 2 years. I mean, how does that happen?
That's amazing.
Have
That's incredible.
Have they read your books?
Some of them, yeah. They have to, it has to be approved what I release, but I think there's only been like a couple things that they said, no, don't do that.
Oh yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I was wondering about
Yeah.
that, because it seems like there's a lot of information here, but I guess it's been approved and they, I guess, vet it first.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There's one other really cool thing that I think you guys will like, is like I learned how they form like the ship, and they weld metal in space. And how they showed me that was they had me go out in space with them, and they gave me 2 pieces of metal, 2 different types of metal. And all I had to do is touch them and they fused together. And so they can bend it, mold it, they can change it. In space, you can weld metals that will come together without any equipment. You just touch them.
Wow.
Which is incredible.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And it would explain a lot. So in space, when you say you go out into space, is this something that you have to like put a suit on for and go out? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, they took me out because I wanted to go out there. It was so cool. It's like, oh yeah, this is kind of interesting too. I think you'll appreciate. Yeah, that was, to see that we had to be in suits and stuff. And you think when like, I wanted to walk on the ship before we went inside. And when we started walking, it wasn't like I expected, where you would have magnetic boots or something. It was absolutely normal. And you didn't leave the ship. And there's something that connects the two. Oh yeah, the suits are really funny too. They're like this big, right? And it's like, you want me to put that on, And so I'm kind of assuming it's going to stretch, right? But it doesn't stretch, it grows. So as you put you step into it, this little midget outfit and stuff, it just begins to grow to you. And like where it's all connected. And then it comes up to here. And when you put the helmet type thing on, it grows into it. And so it's completely sealed, right? And then you have your climate and everything else that's within that. You don't feel the pressure or any weight to it. It's just weird, like a living being. And that leads me to like the pod, for instance. They took me out and I went for rides in them, right? And then it got to the point where, dude, I want to be an astronaut, man. Let me fly one, And in order to do that, there's no instruments or nothing in these things. And so in order to teach me, they put in like a light board, like something that wasn't really there, with like a toggle and everything, and then like buttons and stuff sort of thing. And, I explained that in the book, where I put my hand, I want to move forward, I do this and this, right? And then in other words, it was training me to make motions. And so eventually they took that away from me, and I thought, what the hell do I do now? But they just said you go through the motions of what you would do to do certain things. Then what you see, like when you see these spacecraft and they have like a blur around them, it's what I call a plasma, but what it is PI. It's not AI, but it's personal intelligence. In other words, that your frequencies and who you are is placed in it. It's a living being that they create. That's actually just a field, right? So if I'm going to go and jump somewhere or something, and I'm going to do something wrong, it prevents that from happening. It's like it knows ahead of time what my action would be, right? And what's going to happen then in the next very moment. But that moment is enough for it to do a correction or something to protect you. And so you have this PI, and that's how like the ships and everything work. And that's how what the frequency is determined to what frequency is going to be placed in that next place, which I call it jumping to when it's not, it's usually just changing positions. So anyways, I thought that was interesting. Now, what was the question?
Oh, I don't think there was a question, but I do like everything you described in the book. The entire time I'm thinking to myself, this sounds like the Enterprise. It sounds like Star Trek. The replicators, the holodeck, which the holodeck is interesting to me because it sounds like the way you describe love, like, or the sensing. I mean, you have to like go back to that memory and it becomes real. Well, in that holodeck area, isn't that what you were doing? Like you go and think hard about a memory and it becomes real. Is that what happens there?
That's one purpose of it. Other ones you can just completely create. And, I use those words to help people understand. I mean, what else do I call that? Right. But it makes sense. And I do that a lot in the books. Also, there's a lot in the books that I'll learn something, right? And I write about my experience. Then later down the road, I learn something more about that experience. So then I write that experience and how it related to it. So I write as I learn, I write as I experience. So all that stuff can change as you go through it. But like, there's like, you're probably talking about the one where I'm on the shrimp boat and I got stung by a scorpion fish and they was too far from shore. So they just tied me to the bow of the boat and, hope I survived till they got back. And I'm describing the moon, how big it looked when I woke up and everything. And it's like, oh my God, I'm dead or something, right? I had that experience, but it was so beautiful. And that's so burnt into my mind or my brain that when I touch the wall and start seeing that, it recreates it into the holodeck. Now there's other things that we experience that are on the same level. Like there's two things in particular that I found so cool. We're on one of these colonies that they have, and they have like entertainment too, right? And a lot of stuff like that. And we're just cruising around and, we went to like a restaurant where, that's something special when you can have actual food rather than these little gray balls, which is a whole nother story. But there's this game that one of them told me that I might be interested in. And it's where you lay down on a table and there's a lot of categories, right? And so I wanted to experience like like on the old martial arts, right? The swordsman and samurai and stuff like that. Well, of course, they didn't have anything quite like that. I mean, that particular, but they had something very similar to that. And so basically, it was this guy fighting, and he was taking on several other people with these swords. And when I laid down in there, I actually became that being. And everything that I was aware of was being that being, right? I believed it full-heartedly. I didn't question. I was that person. I couldn't make the moves, but I could experience each of those moves. I could also experience the emotion as I would kill one of them or something. I felt that I was that being. That was the game, right? And when I got out of there, it was like, holy crap, that was cool. But there's another thing too. So their way of doing things, they can do. I mean, it's pretty much unlimited. But we met these people. I call it the tourist girls, and because of something they helped us with, and they're Plejaren. And one of their, when you're Plejaren, you just choose what you want to be, and that's what you become, and that's your total focus in life, because that's happiness, right? And so these three ladies, they like to be entertainers, and so one of the other things they took me to was they had this like dance floor and stuff, and it's like a disco floor. It's all lighting up and everything, and all these people look like professional dancers out there and stuff. And they're going, let's go down here and dance. And it's like, I don't dance. I don't do that, and this isn't me. And they go, you'll love it. Well, come on, come with us. So I go with them, and we all get in a position and everything. And they start these tones, right? That's coming from the music. It's music, right? But these tones are doing something. And what it's doing is it's activating like a spasm in your brain and making motions of your body. So I'm like going with the music through those tones. My body's reacting without me doing anything. It's just actually so I'm dancing, and I'm perfect. I'm like a professional dancer, and all these people are doing the same thing, and it's all because of the tones that they are doing that activates like these spasms in the mind or brain to use your muscles and stuff. And it was beautiful. And the feeling that you got inside was so warm, it was just beautiful. Everything around became brighter, it was beautiful.
Wow.
But these are some of the capabilities that they have.
Yeah. You're explaining a lot that I imagine is in the later books, which actually, as we're speaking, I think your book 2 just arrived. So I can't wait to start that one. But
oh, cool.
I really can't thank you enough for sharing everything. And it's just absolutely fascinating and next level information, honestly. Like, we've interviewed lots of people for 5 years now, and it's always a treat to have someone on who's, like I said, speaking from the heart and sharing from an authentic place, and just matter of factly telling it like it is. And I can't thank you enough. And I do have one last question. What are the odds that do they watch your interviews? Like, will they be watching this?
Sam Jess does. She's my hover parent. Yeah. My helicopter parent. They all are my helicopter parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hi, Sam Jess, if you're listening to this. Aaron, did you have anything that you wanted to ask him before we start wrapping this up?
No, that was incredible. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And yeah, that was amazing. I'm about halfway through book 1. I can't wait to finish it. And I bought books 1, 2, and 3 all at the same time. So I already have 2 and 3. So I can't wait to get into those, and then probably keep going. I'm going to probably read all 8, I'm sure. So
yeah,
it's fascinating stuff. And your experiences, in my opinion, people need to know this stuff, but you can't force people to be at where they're not at. So it's like the right people are, I think, drawn to this type of information. Your story, but you're doing amazing work just putting it out there, and everything you're doing with the child sex, rescuing and trafficking. That's incredible. So thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Yeah. It's important to know all the money that comes in from these books goes right into the rescues.
That's incredible.
We don't have any payroll or nothing. So, and bless you guys so much. I mean, I so appreciate you letting this out, because again, it's love, right? And that's what we need. That's all there is in life. So, anyways, bless you guys so much, man. You're so much fun.
Yeah, no,
Thank
this
you. You
has
too.
been absolutely
Thank you.
amazing. And can you please tell us a little bit about the website there in your shirt, and if people are interested in what you're actually doing, where they can find you and stuff?
Yeah, I got a website. It's actually the Quest ECSS, or it also, you can write in. This is a lot easier than the Quest ECSS, right? Ending child sex slavery. So, just typing in ending child sex slavery.org, and you'll go to my website. On my website, it kind of describes who we are, and there's no payroll or nothing like that. Everything goes into this, and I explain a lot about who, like, the teammates are. They're ex-military or contractors, and then we got many volunteers and it's mostly over in Asia, because we can kind of create our own law over there, where a lot of people don't understand. Here in the United States, it's illegal for a citizen to go and rescue kids. Or being, especially now, it's crazy, but that's the truth. And so we do where we think we can do the most good. And so we save these kids over there. And I write down every one of our missions, what we did and how many kids we saved and what the conditions were. So I have mission reports of every one of our rescues on the site, so people can understand who we are. And then I show, some pictures of some kids, but I do also in Facebook. It's the page is the Quest ECSS. That simple. But anyway, yeah. So it's all out there. Information is all out there. My phone number, everything. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions I'd like to ask you as far as those missions go and stuff, but maybe we could save that for another time. Just because it's a big conversation, it's a big topic, and I think we'll just end it on a high note today. And just thanks again for coming on. And all of your books are available on Amazon. And if you're not interested in buying them by now, then I guess it's not meant for you, because this is some absolutely fascinating stuff. And we love you all. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for joining us. We can't do this without you. And until next time, have a great evening. Good night.
What happens when water is exposed to EMF, or wireless radiation? Here's something you may not know. Water is conscious, and it responds vibrationally to whatever it is exposed to. At OMNIA, we've done an experiment where we froze and photographed 3 samples of water. Water which was not exposed to EMF radiation, the baseline, looked like this. Water which was exposed to an EMF field, a 5G radiation field in fact, looked like this. And water which was exposed to EMF that is balanced by the OMNIA radiation balancer looked like this. See the difference? Remember, your body is 70% water.
And here's a special offer for the Journey to Truth crowd. Just enter the word truth in caps at the checkout for your 10% discount.